The bands that we have in Australia stack up with the rest of the world. They're on the same level, if not better. It's obviously subjective musically, but in terms of the quality of performance and the professionalism and the attitude that they approach their craft with, yeah, there's more than one Aussie band right now that can be on the same level as these acts. There's no need to be afraid or to lack confidence in sending Aussie bands over to Europe. 2009, organising the Sydney Prog Fest at the Annandale Hotel over 2 days was a real big step in terms of establishing a scene and a community of artists and bringing everyone together, selling a few hundred tickets and making everyone believe that creating a national scene where you could play shows of this size was possible. That was a real big step.
In 2008, I started this thing called Prog Fest, and the first Prog Fest was a band called Sleep Makes Waves, and a band called Neobleviscaris. And we played I think there were 6 bands on the bill, and then I think the following year, Tim said, why don't we hook up and do a show at the Annandale and use 2 stages at the Annandale, and it was awesome.
So myself, Mike, and Tim Charles from Neobleviscaris put on the first Prog Fest at the Annandale Hotel. Stacked lineup that I'd pay $1 million to see these days. 11th He Reaches London, Neobleviscaris, Sleep Makes Waves, Meniscus, the works.
And we tried as best as we can to get those bands coming down to Melbourne to do shows with us and to do shows with the sort of scene we had going. So it was a really cool exchange of bands, and I think the Prog Fest Birds Robe thing worked really well.
I was playing in a band called 11th He Reaches London, and we played one of the Prog Fest shows in Sydney at the Annandale in maybe 2009. And Mike and some other people who were helping out the Birds Robe helped put that show on. And that was the first time I'd met that crew over there. So we knew a lot about the collective idea, like if we could go over there, there's like a bunch of shows that we can, a bunch of bands we can start playing shows with that are like-minded. I think that was the main thing that if we knew nothing about touring ourselves at that point. So if we're going to go outside the country, we knew that it was going to be pretty cool that we could buddy up with some like-minded bands, and they could all basically bring each other to shows at that point, because it wasn't what it is now, that's for sure. And yeah, over time it was like making all these good friends through bands. So I think as much as Birds Road became a label and it's almost like a touring agency now, Mike's bringing all these awesome bands over to Australia. But it started out as, I guess, Mike set surrounded by all these bands who could help each other out no matter where we were in the country. And then that sort of grew into bands touring and us making lots of cool contacts as well. But yeah, so for us, right, I guess Birds Robe was a way for us to interact with the eastern states meaningfully, being in Perth and being separated, and there wasn't even many bands like us around, but there was in Sydney as Birds Robe was starting to form, and so for us it represented a chance to expand and a chance to share our art with more people, which was important to us. found this email the other day actually where I came back and told the rest of Tangled what happened on this other trip with 11th. And so by the time we're touring, like, this is what we need to do. And I've met these people, and like these guys are awesome. So we hadn't really heard that much about Birds Road until we got over there for our first tour. And then that was when we got the opportunity to meet Mike face to face. We played our first shows on the East Coast with Sleep Makes Waves, Meniscus, probably Dumb Saint, and a few other bands that were there. And then the next time we went back again was with Meniscus and a few others. So like we started making these contacts where it wasn't, we'd meet Mike, and then Mike would be like, they're doing everything at the show. He'd be running back and forth to the door. He'd get the merch desk. He'd come tell us how the show went and like give us really good feedback about how things are going compared to like, I guess, our expectations. But I guess always keeping those expectations in check is one thing I would say, because with Mike over the journey, he never lets us get too far ahead of ourselves. But yeah, I think at the start it was interesting to make contact with Mike, and then but once we got there, he was just so hands-on with everything at the show, and he knew everyone, and also and that was our way into meeting every other kind of like-minded band in Australia through that early 2010 time.
So I didn't realize you mentioned half the roster there. Kind of, we kind of hooked up with everyone really quickly, which was great. It's like a portal pathway. Yes, started making friends with everyone, which is great. Yeah.
And then obviously I tried to get some attention for these shows by writing into the street press, and in Sydney that was the Drum Media, and I'd send them emails and invite them to review shows, or I'd tell them that something was coming up. And there were little columns for metal music, and people like Chris Marich and Andrew Hogue would write little pieces, and occasionally they'd give us a nod. They'd say, oh, Sleep Makes Waves are playing at the Bald-Faced Stag with some of these other bands, and it's been described as a night of prog and experimental music. So, this is a metal column, but we like a bit of prog. Why don't you go check it out? And that was a huge buzz for us to get that recognition. And it really excited the artists who'd been going for years and never been mentioned ever. And so it gave us some validation that people saw, Birds Robe was actually helping get these bands' names out.
We were just finding so many ways that we could be involved and help. I remember there was times where I'd be in email conversations with bands, giving them feedback on demos that they'd sent through to us. I remember speaking with Sleep Makes Waves pretty early on when they were demoing for their first big album, and that was a moment for me that I can remember thinking was like very special, because that was a band that I'd seen and loved already. I already loved what they were doing, and now they were turning to us and being like, what do you think of this? I was like, oh, we're not just guys anymore. We're guys that people turn to.
From a Birds Robe perspective, 2010 and 2011, when we started Birds Robe Records and started to release albums by Sleep Makes Waves and Anubis and Pirate, that was when we really focused on improving our media presence and sending CDs out to radio and street press and international blogs and other promoters, and getting reviews and interviews for artists.
So the two main memories I have of the label beginning were I'd ordered some badges to be made with BRC on them, and I think kind of spur of the moment, I also ordered a set of badges that said BRR, kind of preemptively. I don't even think we'd had an album, in the works or anything ready to go, but it was like, pretty sure that this is going to happen, so let's just get these badges done. It was the Birds Robe collaboration band was like the earliest thing that I can remember being like, oh, well, we're going to need a label for this. Because we suddenly had all of these incredibly talented, generous, lovely people, often like-minded, but often kind of from different worlds. We got to do something together and show what the the spirit of this scene was kind of turning into, and that was one of our efforts to do that, was those early Robe collaboration band albums. Musodynamics. Of course, it was called Musodynamics. That was, yeah, hearing that for the first time, I was like, oh wow, like we haven't just, you know, created a stage for people to play on. We're now giving them like a world to play in and other players to play with. Like that was, it felt really wonderful.
It's a label that Mike founded with Alex Tullett, I think, who they were in a band together called Super Florence Jam, and we played some shows with them back in the day as well. Great band, and I think Mike set it up as a bit of a response to the fact that there wasn't really that much support and promotion for some of the more crazier, proggier bands that he really enjoyed listening to. So, yeah, I think it was as a response to that he set the label up and started releasing music.
Many years ago, I ran a website called ozprog.com, which tried to do the same thing. Myself and a guy called Bradley Dixon started that up as sort of the same thing to support prog music in Australia. And over the years, I guess we just kind of lost the drive to keep it going.
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, and sort of when we wound that down is when Mike sort of wound up Bird's Robe.
I think we actually met, well, I met Mike through your Ozprog forum, and I met you from there, obviously, as well.
Because I know I've spoken to Mike previously about the crossover of things, and there was a point where I handed all the logins to Ozprog over to Mike to keep doing whatever he wants with that. So, but yeah, just that idea of having an organisation that not only supports the bands and the artists who are in these kinds of different types of music, but who just actively champions them all the time. Like, Solo's a legend.
We put out a 2 CD sampler, you know, featuring a track from all the Progfest bands, and did this for a couple of years to kind of, you know, send around to radio stations. And I think that was the first time that, you know, some of those bands got Triple J airplay. Someone sent a copy to Andrew Hogue on Triple J, and he played Breaking Orbit a bunch of times and some Sleep Makes Waves and stuff like that. And, you know, became a real great supporter of the kind of stuff that we were doing. And he was writing for some street press as well and would often mention us. So, yeah, you know, a lot of great things came out of that kind of Ozprog community.
I am the hunter, you are the lion. I am under the spell of Orion. I am the hunter, you are the lion. I am the hunter, I am Orion.
when it came time to forming a label, I actually had no idea what to do. I knew that there were things called record labels that would release music. I didn't know what releasing music meant. And at the time, I had the experience of putting out a couple of EPs with Super Florence Jam. And we'd been introduced to MGM distribution through Dave Batty, who I'd met at one of the Manning Bar band competitions. And at the time I was saying, hey, we've got this EP with Super Florence Jam, how do we release it? And he said, oh, I'll introduce you to MGM distribution. He did the intro for me with Mark, and from there they explained the process of sending the CDs to them, how they put them into stores, how we need to decide on pricing, what the CD is sold for, how much money they get, how much money we get, giving them the audio files so that they could release them digitally back on iTunes, which was a thing back then. And you know, they would send us quarterly royalty reports, and if we did well, then you know, maybe they would chip in with a bit of the marketing and promotion. So when I had the idea to create a label, the first people I went to were MGM Distribution, and I said, hey, as you know, we've been doing this Birds Robe thing. I'd kind of loosely kept them up to date, and I've got, I think, at least a dozen bands that will have recordings that we'd like to release. You know, please, very humbly, I request of you, would you help us release this music? And they said, yeah, sounds great. Makes it easier for us. We just send all the reports to one person instead of 50 different bands. So send them over. Here's the template to fill out. You know, go get an ISRC number, which is, you know, a unique identifier for a digital music file. And, you know, that's how we upload the tracks. Give us all the track titles spelt correctly. Give us all the artist names typeset correctly. By the way, why don't you register yourself as a label with ARIA, you know, just in case any of these records do well. Haha, probably won't, but, you know. And so very gradually I started learning about functionally what does a label do to release music, to help get CDs in stores, digital music online.
The impact that Birds Robe had on our first album coming out, Mike helped us with the launch show, and then sort of came to us with a couple of other live opportunities, like supporting Unitopia, because he was doing a tour with them, and that was the first time that we were going to go down to Melbourne. We did the Featherfest and the Progfest shows, and that really helped sort of sell the album just to fans and get us out there. And it was at that show that Mike came to us and said he was forming a record label, and the offer came through for us to do our second record through him. And A Tower of Silence, which is our second record, came out, and we between Mike and the connections that we had built on our first record, and then Mike being able to work with those connections, not just for us, but for other artists on the label. The second album did really, really well and was getting great reviews. It was charting in little sort of distributors charts and stuff in Germany and France, and sold, I can't remember what his statistic was, but it was something like 50 copies in 3 days or 100 copies in 3 days or something. He was really surprised at how quickly it was moving. And we sold out of the first pressing really quickly, and that didn't happen the first time around, obviously, and having a record label behind you makes a huge difference. And we were able to support that with live performances and shows as well.
The other role of a label is to promote the music, and we'd started building up a bit of a mailing list database, as you do, as bands would do independently, but we were trying to encourage people to sign up to Birds Robe Facebook pages and Birds Robe mailing lists to find out about all these shows. And I was compiling a very lengthy text-based list of gigs and, you know, even just sharing upcoming gigs by other artists that weren't really associated with Birds Robe, but we thought people might be interested in. Bands like 12 Foot Ninja and the Crooked Fiddle Band. At the time, you know, they later became part of the Birds Robe family. But, you know, we'd see Joe and Gordon at shows and they were great and awesome people, and so I wanted to promote their shows. And, you know, I'd seen 12 Foot Ninja a couple of years before, and I'd nerded out with Stevic about Adrian Belew and King Crimson, and I thought, these guys are great, I want to support them. And so I don't know how many people read it, certainly enough people to suggest they'd like their gigs included in it more often. But from there, I had some contacts at Street Press. When there was a record to release, I would send a copy of the CD to the Street Press with a handwritten letter on the front saying, please, would you consider reviewing this record? Thank you very much for your support, etc., etc. And eventually I graduated to typing those things out and sending them to more and more people.
The first thing that I got in my pigeonhole at PBS that I played on air was the Solkiri EP that they put out. So that kind of made me realise that there was this cool scene in Sydney to some degree. And I can't actually remember when I realised that Birds Robe was behind all these things, but I got in touch with Mike early on and got some interviews with some bands, and yeah, we've had a great sort of working relationship ever since.
Yeah, he was kind of picked us up for the EP launch and onwards. That was kind of, yeah, his kind of first significant involvement with us as a band, where he kind of started doing stuff rather than us doing not much.
I have a very fond and vivid memory of Alex Wilson from Sleep Makes Waves coming to my parents' house where I was living back in 2011, and we had both put together an Excel spreadsheet of all the local radio stations and blogs and everything that we wanted to send all the albums to. And we sat down, he packaged a bunch of albums over there, I packaged a bunch here, we hand wrote the addresses on them, and he drove all the way back home, and the next day I put all the stamps individually on them and sent them out. And that was how we promoted CDs back in the day. From there, it's obviously evolved a lot, but that was the fundamental thing, doing mail-outs and taking the time to do it, and spending the time on the internet to find out how to contact all of these media outlets. That was something that a lot of artists didn't necessarily have the time or motivation to do, because a lot of times it feels like you're just shouting into the abyss and no one is listening, and you can get demotivated from lack of replies. But I had confidence in Birds Robe as a separate entity to these artists to be able to leverage that brand name and reputation in order to get a reply from people and to say, this is now not just a random band sending you a thing saying, hey, we're good, please listen. This is now a bona fide label saying, we feel strongly enough about this act that we signed them and we now would like you to listen to them. And again, it worked. People actually listen to the music and they reply to us and say, hey, this is great, we're going to play this on Sunday night.
I have huge phobia and anxiety around self-promoting. And so for me, Mike and Birds Robe has always been a wonderful and trusted solution to that problem. He's someone
that I know believes in what we do and that I can trust him with what we create musically. And I know that he'll go and knock on the doors that I will never knock on.
I met Mike, and I remember having a conversation with him before we released our second album, and he was chatting about that this, he's got this label and this is what he's doing, and I just wasn't quite sure how serious he was, because you chat to a lot of people at shows, and people are always really enthusiastic, and they talk to you about these ideas, and a lot of the times people are just, they're just being so nice, and I'm just like, is this guy just, so I generally had no idea what sort of his vision was and what he was trying to do. So I was a little bit dismissive at first, only because I just couldn't read. I couldn't read the situation. I didn't understand it, and I just thought, no, we'll just do our own thing. We'll, opportunities will come. We'll put out albums on our own and that sort of stuff. And there were a couple of bands at the time that were working already fairly closely with Mike at that point. I mean, Sleep Makes Waves was one of the biggest obvious ones. And then, sort of, I think a couple of years went by, might have been maybe 2011, 2012, something like that. And then suddenly I was like, you know what, like, true to the guy's word, like Mike's actually doing the stuff that he said he was going to do, and it only seemed to progress from there. And I'm like, fair play. And so the next time we had a conversation, I was like, yeah, man, get us on board, 100%. So it was good. It was but initially it's one of those things, because you get people coming up to you going, oh, I'm so and so, I'm a promoter, and I book bands and I do this, and then you sort of read into a little bit and you're like, okay, maybe not. But no, Mike was definitely one of the genuine ones, even though it was a bit hard to sort of realise that at first.
When it came time to put out the first album, the first Toehider album, I reached out to Mike, and that was when he first started Bird's Robe. And I just asked him if he'd be interested in putting the first album out under his label, and he loved the idea, and and then we just went from there.
Tom and Alex, who were doing the breakfast shows on Triple J, had a segment on Friday mornings where they would invite Nicole Cheek, who was programming Triple J Unearthed, and set her a challenge to find a Triple J Unearthed band that, started with a letter J, or had 6 people in it, or had a flugelhorn in it or something, and then they would play that artist on the following week's show. And so they were looking for suggestions on what the challenge would be that week. And I just texted in songs about the word yes. Because Toehider had this song, I Must Say Yes, which is just, I thought was the funniest song I'd ever heard. And I felt like, maybe if they choose that challenge, they might come across this Toe Hider song and listen to it, and maybe they'll like it and play it. I didn't really understand how the whole Triple J process worked at that point, but surprisingly enough, they read out the challenge for Nicole was going to be to find songs about the word yes. Yes, yes, and I say yes. Yes, yes. And then in that moment, I was like, all right, they're definitely going to find this Toe Hider song. Like, I don't know if they're going to play it, but they're definitely going to find it. And I just wanted them to listen to Toe Hider, basically. Just an excuse to get them to listen to something that, you know, Mike Mills had written and performed. Anyway, I completely forgot about this. And a week goes by, and I'm woken up by a phone call from someone at Triple J saying, hey, are you Mike? Are you available to come on air on Triple J? Because we got the answer to your challenge, the song about the word yes. And I was like, oh, yeah, sure, okay. And then they're like, all right, we'll call you in like half an hour. And they called me back like 5 minutes later, and they're like, hey, Mike, sorry, what's your last name? And that's when I knew they were going to play Toe Hider, because they've obviously looked up Toe Hider, seen that his name is Mike Mills, and they're like, oh my God, did this Mike guy just like set his own challenge to have his own song played on radio? And I'm like, no, my name is Mike Solo. And they're like, oh, do you play in a band? And I'm like, yeah, I play in a band called Super Forest Jam. And they're like, all right, cool. Yeah, we'll call you in half an hour. So then I knew. So I was like, hey, Mike. I texted Mike Mills. I'm like, Mike, tune into Triple J in half an hour. Like, I'm gonna be on Triple J. And I posted on Facebook, hey, everyone, I'm gonna be on Triple J in 20 minutes or whatever. I didn't say that Toe Hider's gonna get played, but I was so sure they were gonna play this song. And sure enough, they get me on, and they're like, hey, you know, why did you set this challenge? Songs about the word yes. And it just so happened that I was getting married that weekend. And so I said, oh yeah, you know, I'm getting married, and, you know, because she said yes, my soon-to-be wife said yes. And so that's, you know, I just wanted a song about the word yes. And they're like, oh, that's lovely. That's cool. You know, and do you play in a band? And I was like, yeah, Super Forest Jam. And Nicole had actually listened to some of the Super Forest Jam stuff and very kindly said, oh, they're cool. So that was nice. And they said, I can't remember, Tom or Alex said, well, Mike, have we got the song for you? Check this out. And they play I Must Say Yes by Toe Hider.
Single puny voice. I've just confirmed what I've known all along. Got to see this, I've got to see this, I've got to see this, I've got to see this. Yes, yes, I must say yes. 22 times.
And it was one of the greatest moments of my life, because I was like, yes, finally, thousands of people around the country are listening to Toe Hider. And yeah, they finished the track. They loved it. Zan Rowe even like commented about it on her social media. And of course, I never have told anyone this story until now. So I think it's far enough in the past that it's okay. But yeah, sorry, Triple J. Just gotta play the game. Anyway, Toe Hider actually went on to get a bunch more airplay on Triple J. I was able to kind of, once I figured out what the hell I was doing with the label, I kept bringing in Toe Hider stuff and talking about the tours and the success that Toe Hider was having. And Richard Kingsmill, you know, played a few singles from Toe Hider over the next few years, which was awesome. So, yeah, one of my proudest moments as the record label guy at the time. Around this time, I was very comfortable booking shows for bands. I felt like I had the skills to be able to find venues in a couple of other cities, and I felt comfortable promoting CDs, sending them to radio stations, and getting some street press reviews and previews happening for shows.
what I didn't yet feel comfortable about was the idea of managing artists. Pirate had already approached me to say, hey Mike, you've been doing such a great job booking shows for us. We really feel the connection. We'd like you to manage us. And I said, thanks so much guys, it's really very flattering, but I don't feel I'm ready for that responsibility. Because managing an artist's career is a very big responsibility. I still had very fresh memories of how tricky it can be to be in a band and the type of frustrations that you run up against. And I always felt like, you know, what I was doing by booking bands and starting the label and filling in all these gaps was to get bands to a point where they could get picked up by a manager, whatever managers did, and take them to another level, or get picked up by a bigger label or a bigger booking agent. The goal wasn't for me to carve out a career in the industry, it was just to help get bands to another level. Some time went past, and one day I saw an email from Pirate replying to me about a gig or something. And as I scrolled down, I saw that in their signature, they'd written Mike Solo, bookings and management. And by this time, I mean, I thought it was very funny. By this time, I was cool with it. I felt like the discussions we'd been having with Pirate and a lot of the bands were pretty much along the lines of what I understood management to be, which is basically taking an overall strategic approach to an artist's goals and trying to help them achieve their goals and filling in whatever gaps and puzzle pieces we needed to fill to make that happen. So if some bands were great at booking their own shows, I wouldn't necessarily book them shows all the time, but I might help them with the promotional side. If some bands were terrible at getting gigs, but amazing with their graphic design and promotion and could make all their own Facebook events, I wasn't doing so much of the marketing, but I was helping them get the venues or find the lineups to fill their gigs. So not too long after that, I had been booking shows for Sleep Makes Waves, and Kid from Sleep Makes Waves continually was saying, hey Mike, we got to sit down and have a proper chat about you becoming the manager.
The biggest change to the band would probably be when we decided that, hey, we need a manager here. And I don't even think, like Mike never approached us and said, you know, I think you guys need a manager, or hey, let me, you know, be involved with you guys. We were already involved with him. He was already booking shows for us, and he was a no-fuss guy. Everything always went smoothly. There were never any dramas, and he was already giving us advice anyway. Going, hey, have you guys considered doing blah? Have you considered doing this or that? And yeah, we had a discussion as a band, and we're like, let's just ask Mike if he can help us more. Like, we'll pay the guy. Yeah. Like, we'll treat him like a member of the band, and we'll see if, you know, he's up for it. And yeah, I think I called him up the next day or that evening and put it to him. Said, hey, you know, the band's been talking. What do you think about being our manager?
I thought about that for some time because they were a band with a slightly larger profile. But ultimately, by the time we had that phone call, you know, I felt I was ready for it. And I said to them, look, yeah, I'll be the manager. but nothing has to change because the relationship we already have, I've basically been managing you for the past several months. And they reflected on that and thought, yeah, that's cool.
He was kind of like, well, you know, what do you want? Like, what can I offer you guys? And like, well, you know, we just need someone who's not a member of the band making the final call on a few decisions for us. And he's like, oh yeah, I can do that. You know, I can help you guys out. And I was like, oh yeah, you know, we'll give you a cut, you know, of like anything that we make, which was nothing. Like, we'll give you a cut of nothing. And yeah, he was like, no, that cannot be the deal. I genuinely like you guys and believe in you guys. Let's just see where we can take this together. So it just all started from there.
It was very important to me at that stage of my relationship with all these bands that I was not taking a commission from any of the shows, any of the management stuff. I always had the philosophy that 10% of $50 is $5, so what's the point? And I felt that building and establishing trust with the artist was far more important than making a couple of dollars. I wasn't doing this for the money. I was really trying to do this to build a scene and a sense of community that was far more valuable. Given some of the experiences that some of these artists had had with other agencies, previous management, previous labels, where money was quite a point of contention, and my own personal experience, where, you know, even things as simple as splitting the $60 to pay for the rehearsal room was, you know, often led to a, you know, career-threatening argument within a band. I didn't really want to have that pressure or that overlay in the relationship with artists. So that's where the management started.
Business-wise, it's Mike Solo, who everyone will have many things to say about, but like, just to put in a line, none of the like success that people perceive Sleep Makes Waves as having would have ever occurred without Mike Solo. He is absolutely responsible, as much as any member of the band, for anything of meaning that we've achieved.
Sleep Makes Waves, who already kind of had a buzz going on internationally through the internet, their album came out and their numbers were growing because they had a really good set and their live show was improving, and it was kind of time to take them on the road and present them nationally and turn them into that aspirational touring act. That was when, you know, we had to start making connections with the industry more frequently.
And coming on later was Dan Sant, our Australian booking agent.
He was at Harbour and he was, again, like, he was fairly new, but he was working with big bands and he saw something in us and he took a punt on us.
And yeah, he sort of has showed to me what loyalty is in the industry. Like, you know, he's picked us up as a little band and as a guy starting out, and he's now like booking Genesis Owusu, and he's kind of like brought Lord to festivals, but he's always made us feel like we matter to him, you know, and finding people like that in the industry, that's a rare thing. So like, we couldn't have done any of it without Dan.
So when I started managing Sleep Makes Waves, one of the first things I asked them were what their goals were. And a huge one on the list for them was to go overseas, play Europe, and also play in America at South by Southwest. So we applied and we got invited to go showcase at South by. Before they went overseas for the first time, I really wanted Sleep Makes Waves to be prepared with their live show, because as an Australian band, you often only play 2, maybe 3 shows in a row across a weekend. But if they're going to America or Europe, they've got to play 7, 10, 15 shows in a row. So with the help of Dan Sant at Harbour Agency, who was the Sleep Makes Waves agent, we booked a national Australian tour all through January, February and March for the guys to play.
We scored the support slot for Sleep Makes Waves, a single they had off their first album, Hello Cloud Mountain Tour. And yeah, again, we got to play these bigger rooms when we're, you know, used to playing to like 30 people. So to play at like the SP, like fantastic opportunity, and we were able to do that.
I added extra secret shows every Sunday after they'd come back from Perth or Brisbane or Melbourne, just to get the guys in shape. And they'd play at the Lansdowne Hotel. It'd be like their 4th or 5th show in a row. And I just wanted them to kind of be able to deliver even though they're feeling tired or jet lagged or whatever. And you know, to their credit, those guys smashed it every night. And by the time they hit America and Europe, they're ready to go. South by Southwest was an incredible experience. There's thousands of bands playing, heaps of people there. You know, we saw some incredible performances and met some great people. We saw This Will Destroy You and So I Watch You From Afar. We got to meet the Dead Letter Circus guys and hang out with them and book some shows around it where, you know, I learned about American visas and how tricky and expensive they are to get, and also the logistics of taking an Australian band with Australian powered equipment around and promoting shows in New York and LA.
Went to South by Southwest and we played at that festival and did a handful of other shows in the States. And at South by Southwest we saw And So I Watch You From Afar play. And I often sort of think about it in terms of like, we saw those guys and they were just so physically compelling on stage. That seemed to us at the time, that was the way forward. I think we probably wanted to be a band that could play really well and really physically on stage.
One of the most memorable moments of South by Southwest was when we actually found out that Sleep Makes Waves had been invited to tour with Carnival around Australia in July of that year. And I remember breaking the news to the guys after getting the email from Heath, their manager, and it was just this absolute thrill where we really felt for the first time that instead of being outsiders from the industry and the Australian scene, that we were kind of part of it, being at South by Southwest, meeting all these great bands from around the world, and now being part of this massive tour that was about to go around the country. The experience of playing at South by Southwest and touring in America was incredible, and we couldn't wait to go back again. Then we did Europe 3 weeks later, and that changed everything for us.
Dunk Festival was a really big one.
Oh, it was so good. There's a photo of me, Alex, just like sitting there at the catering tent, just going like, yes, because they like had this amazing food. We were in fucking Belgium, surrounded by like heroes, and they were feeding us like chips and moules frites or whatever it was. I can't remember. Some Belgian.
Belgian chips.
And we're literally just like, yes, this is like insane.
A huge part of our enthusiasm for Europe was Dunk Festival and the wonderful people that run that event. You know, here's a festival for post-rock music with hundreds of people there, and they're, you know, very open to bringing Australian bands over there because in Europe, having an Australian band is very exotic. So, you know, after Sleep Makes Waves became the first Aussie band to play at Dunk, we were able to book Tangled Thoughts of Leaving and Soulkiri and We Lost the Sea, Meniscus, Dumb Saint, and so many other wonderful bands have had their first European touring experience anchored by Dunk Festival. So, you know, we're just incredibly grateful for that relationship. They're beautiful people, and, you know, since then we've gone on to collaborate with them on Dunk Records. They press all our vinyl, and, you know, we've released some of their acts in Australia as well. So, yeah, it's a relationship going on over a decade now, and truly one of the best things that we've been involved with as Birds Robe is our relationship with Dunk.
I think basically he reached out to us to have one of his bands or more on the festival, right? It's been a long time ago, And ever since we try to have at least a few Robe bands on the lineup. Also, every year we have a co-release with him, so it's a very nice partnership.
The first festival we ever got invited to play was Dunk Festival in Belgium, and that would be a highlight for me. We were still very like newbies at touring internationally, and we didn't know what to expect. And I remember being on stage about to come on and hearing people chanting our band name.
We're Sleep Makes Waves. We came from Sydney, Australia. This is our first ever show on the continent of Europe. It blows our minds that we're here to be playing for you. Thank you all so much.
We don't know these people. Like, it's just weird. Like, but it was just the greatest feeling as well. And it just fills you with excitement. And you're like, this is going to be a special show, guys. Like, and it's our first one. That was probably one of the highlights for me that I'll always remember.
It was an incredible experience. It was amazing to go there with an Australian band and see all of these European and American bands that we'd followed online but never really, seen perform, and get to enjoy this incredible, legendary community of, European fans and artists that was really nothing like I'd seen anywhere else in the world, and certainly not in Australia. Knowing that there was a large venue where thousands of people would come to see instrumental post-rock, and all of the things that I was saying to people back home in Australia, like, oh yeah, there's a big audience for this music, it's not super niche, and we can play big rooms, and people would look at me like, yeah, but can ya, sure mate. And being able to say, well, there's this huge festival in Belgium that's putting on these amazing acts that you've never heard of, but there's hundreds of people watching every single band and they love it. And they're selling merch, and they're, talking to the bands afterwards and telling them how much they appreciate them. It was really very inspiring for what we were trying to do. And I was grateful to be there with Sleep Makes Waves to experience it firsthand. The other thing was that Sleep Makes Waves obviously had a really good live show, and I felt very strongly as a fan and also as their manager and friend that they were a world-class band. But it wasn't until I actually went on that tour with them and saw all of these other bands, and a lot of them with very impressive international reputations, perform, that I could say with the evidence behind me, yeah, the bands that we have in Australia stack up with the rest of the world. They're on the same level, if not better. It's obviously subjective musically, but in terms of the quality of performance and the professionalism and the attitude that they approach their craft with, yeah, there's more than one Aussie band right now that can be on the same level as these acts. There's no need to be afraid or to lack confidence in sending Aussie bands over to Europe, because I know that they can hold their own up here next to all these amazing acts.
I feel like it was that meeting, that fateful meeting, that opened up the door to the possibility that the things that we thought maybe were reserved for bands that weren't us, that bands were in other genres or other spaces, were things, or even other places in the world. I mean, being in Australia, it's often very daunting to consider the idea of spending all this money to travel overseas to play this music to nobody. But Mike kind of came along and said, well, there's this audience of this size in Sydney for this kind of music. So it's a logical deduction that you guys can actually do that as well. And there's an audience of this kind overseas for this kind of music. So if you guys just spend the time and get over there and make it and do that in a way that's sustainable, it's a logical deduction that you can actually do that sustainably as well. And that was just kind of a consciousness raising thing. It was like, well, we'd never really thought of it that way.
One of the live performances that really stood out was 65 Days of Static at Dunk Festival that year. Sleep Makes Waves played, had a great response, we were all on a high, and then 65 Days of Static came on. And obviously they have an incredible back catalogue, very impressive musicians, very accomplished producers and songwriters, but just an incredible, dynamic and powerful live show. And I remember watching it thinking, oh my goodness, like if only all the people in Australia that come to our shows could see this, it would just blow their minds. And then I started thinking, oh, well, we're here. How do we make that happen? And I didn't know how these tours came about. But after the show, we were chatting to Rob and Paul and Joe and Simon from 65 and said, oh, you guys were awesome, and they're very, grateful for the feedback and very polite. And I said, well, have you guys thought about coming to Australia? Because you've never been. And they just straight up said, oh yeah, we've always wanted to go to Australia, but we just don't have a record label there. And I thought, oh, well. And then Alex and Otto chimed in and said, well, hey, he's got a record label. And they looked at me like, oh, well, you're the guy then. So they made some introductions with Kim at Monotream Records, who was their British label, and I got a license to release their back catalogue in Australia to try and build some interest and build more of a fan base for this incredible band that I've just seen. So I'm riding high on the euphoria and the inspiration of that incredible live show I've just seen. And then I've also just done this managers workshop called the Seed Workshop, run by John Butler and Danielle Caruana, to kind of inspire and educate young managers. And people like Stacey Piggott, who do amazing publicity work, were there talking about PR. So now I'm all inspired with, how to do publicity in Australia, and I'm just like going for it, without any shame, just contacting all the radio stations. Oh, this amazing British band, 65 Days of Static, they play this crazy math, electronic, post-rock kind of thing, as if they knew what that would be.
Mike is so fucking earnest with prog music. It's so adorable. Like, he has no awareness of the fact that the mainstream thinks prog is kind of lame, and it rocks. Like, he'll just march into Triple J with a plastic bag full of CDs with bands like, the Elephant Collective, or like the Noise Jam Ball Pit, and he'll just be like, yo, Kings Mill, listen to this shit, this fucking slaps. Like, it rocks. And like, we needed someone like that, because like there's always a bit of cringe with this stuff. Mike just goes for it. It's awesome.
Actually got quite a lot of coverage for them, got quite a lot of local radio airplay. Fenella Kernebone on Triple J Sound Lab was very supportive, and we did things like had Sleep Makes Waves and 65 remix each other's tracks and release those. And it all kind of culminated in getting the okay from the band to book tour dates for them. And that led to booking them on Pete's Ridge Festival.
That festival was good because there was only a few bands that I'd marked out at the start. It was very much a discovery festival. Like, if you looked at the lineup now, you'd know probably 3/4 of them. But back then, I didn't know many of them at all. So 65 Days of Static I knew of, and I thought they'd be pretty cool. But not to the level of how amazing they were.
Booking some really nice venues around Australia in January 2013, with Sleep Makes Waves as the support band and some great local acts opening up. It was a great eye-opener for me to, first of all, know that I could do something like that, navigate the process of applying for visas and all this kind of stuff, be able to fulfill a hole in the hearts of long-suffering post-rock fans, to bring a band out to Australia for the first time, especially one who's been around for such a long time as they had. And then also get feedback from the band on, yeah, this was a great tour, we had a lot of fun, there were people, it was well promoted. This flight was maybe a bit early in the morning, but this accommodation was great, and all that kind of stuff. And I had all this confidence that I could do stuff like that, and I could create opportunities for local bands to play with their international heroes like 65.
Another really big one for me was getting invited to do the bus tour with 65 Days of Static. They were a really big influence on us in the beginning and are like one of the all-time bands in the style. And sort of that was a moment for me when I sort of felt like a bit of the world of post-rock was getting opened up for us, getting to play on their undercard.
We were making other connections during this time as well. And, I met Pete and Jim, who were managing Dead Letter Circus, and they got Meniscus to jump on playing with Dead Letter Circus in Sydney. And, we've made some connections with Dunk Festival. And so now I'm sort of working with Tangled Thoughts Are Leaving, and they're on Dunk Festival in 2013.
This is our first ever show in Europe. So we're so stoked to share this evening with you guys. We're going to play another number off our full-length album. This one's called Deep Rivers Run Quiet. Please enjoy it. Cheers.
As I was kind of going through it and contemplating, well, what's the next move from here, literally every single show, I was selling merch at all the shows because that's what I usually did. I used to like to meet everyone and ask them how they found out about the show and where they heard the music and all that kind of stuff. And every single show, multiple people would come up and say, thank you so much for bringing 65 Days of Static to Australia. When are you going to bring This Will Destroy You to Australia? And so I thought, well, I guess better reach out to This Will Destroy You. Days of Bird's Robe, I think I was in my 20s in the early days of Bird's Robe, fairly naive about how the world worked, and I was very adamant that because there were already bigger bands playing progressive and experimental music, and they were making music for a living, I thought we have bands in Australia that are of the same level of quality, and we should be able to reach that market as well. Now, I had identified my friends' bands and a few other bands around Sydney and Melbourne that I liked, and I thought these are going to be the bands to do it. And if we all get together, we'll create something bigger than the sum of its parts, and we'll eventually, be able to lift one or two of these bands, and a rising tide floats all boats, and one of these bands will be the gateway to people hearing all the other bands. So Sleep Makes Waves have obviously had an amazing year, 2012. National tour, a couple of sold out shows, American tour, European tour, tour with Carnival, ARIA nomination for their And So We Destroyed Everything album, another Australian tour. They're on Pete's Ridge Festival and touring with 65 Days of Static. And we're all really consistent about communicating this to the media, and we got great support from outlets like The Music. They invited Sleep Makes Waves to write a tour blog, and radio stations like FBI and PBS Radio, RTRFM in Perth, 4ZZZ, were super enthusiastic about helping us celebrate the wins of this instrumental music scene and play these bands on their radio stations late at night. But Triple J was kind of the next step. It's the national youth broadcaster in Australia. It's broadcast everywhere in the country. And we'd had some support in the past. Dom Alessio, Richard Kingsmill, Fenella Kernebone had played Sleep Makes Waves a few times, which was really surprising and greatly appreciated. But once we got to the Love of Cartography record, I really felt like Sleep Makes Waves had enough runs on the board to justify a full playlist edition. And I went in there with all the touring plans we had going around the world, Europe, America, Australia, and gratefully the music team there decided that it would be worthwhile adding a 6.5-minute instrumental post-rock song to High Rotation on Triple J, and that became the Something Like Avalanche's single. When we first started Bird's Robe, I think we had a vision for how we could build a scene. But I also had this idea in my head stubbornly that because of the success of bands like the Mars Volta, Pink Floyd, Tool, Explosions in the Sky, Mogwai, Sigur Rós, I knew that there were thousands of people in Australia that were interested in this kind of music. And I firmly believe that there could be a local Australian band that could get big enough to headline a venue like the Metro Theatre in Sydney, which is an 1,100 capacity venue in the heart of the CBD. And that was the goal. And once Sleep Makes Waves got things rolling with their Love of Cartography album, and we had Triple J support, they're touring with Carnival, they're playing festivals, they're doing headline shows at the Manning Bar and the Corner Hotel, with 500-600 tickets. That's when I started to believe, wow, like we might have the first band that we think can do it. And we booked the Metro Theatre for June 2015 off the back of a 55-date, 22-country tour around Europe, the UK, Asia for Sleep Makes Waves. And the Metro was the final show on that run, and just an incredible moment for us. That felt like the dream had come true.
What I see Bird's Robe is that it's this constant marketing hustle. How do you get in front of people? And, Mike certainly talked about this over the years as well. You see the metrics, you go, if thousands of people go to the Hordern to see Dream Theatre, then why can't those 5,000 people in Sydney also be going to all the Bird's Robe shows and supporting all those Bird's Robe artists? So the numbers make sense. It's just, how do you work out the science to connect them together and get in front of them? And I feel that that's a constant thing in his head. So there's always this hustle, and even at shows, flyers handing out, networking, talking to people, and just spreading that brand, which then is the gateway to this collection of great artists.
I was lucky enough to support Sleep Makes Waves when they performed for the first time at the Metro in Sydney. Being part of that was exceptional. It's the biggest crowd that Sirius B could ever play to, and we felt really honoured to be asked. But on top of that, just seeing a packed Metro Theatre and Sleep Makes Waves absolutely in their element and just blowing away the crowd was a real high point. And I think really is the culmination of all the work that Mike's been doing with that band to develop them, to get them regular touring schedules, to get them in front of people.
For the most part, all the other Bird's Robe artists are like, yes, like it's such a huge win for the team because it's a Bird's Robe band.
Yeah, Sleep Makes Waves is phenomenal.
And to see them chase their dream to grow their brand both here and overseas, yeah, it's inspiring. It's almost gratifying in a way. You get to see a bunch of really humble dudes who just want to thrash their instruments and make like joyous, energetic music be accepted and embraced and like catapulted level after level after level.
Absolutely. I mean, there's that Birds Robe vibe that, you know, you've got a, I don't know, it's like you got a gold medalist from your hometown kind of thing. It was awesome when they actually like would do stuff at that kind of level. You're like, they're my boys.
My boys.
It was nice. It was more than nice. It was fucking incredible. It's great.
Yeah.
This is called Something Like Avalanches. This is the most incredible hometown show we've ever played. Thank you so much, Sydney. From the bottom of our hearts, we love you guys.
What eventually happened as we got busier and busier with doing shows, I'm still doing it for free, I'm working my day job, we're making more and more connections with people. I realized the value of having more and more artists involved because everyone from all these different cities and states in Australia is bringing something to the table. You got Tangled Thoughts of Living in Perth.
I just remember just being excited, you know, and seeing a collective and a fledgling label that was, you know, combining all these like-minded bands and you know, in a similar sort of scene, and it wasn't a scene over here, so to be able to link up with them was exciting, but like I was so naive at that point, and I think I was just incredibly happy and excited to make new friends and find new people, and the chance to work with bands like Sleep Makes Waves and Meniscus and those sort of bands who were listening to at this point and sharing art with. And then Mike had a very distinct vision about what he wanted to do and the belief he had in the bands and how he'd expand upon that. So my early impressions were just curiosity and excitement, I think.
You know, we're kind of cross-pollinating and everyone's becoming friends with each other and it's all feeling good. You know, along the way, I've hopefully learned all these skills, and when opportunities come up to work with bands like Closure in Moscow, you know, I feel like I'm able to take them on and get enjoyment out of them, and it doesn't feel like hard work. It feels like, you know, this great joy.
Our manager at the time was sort of stepping back and we were brainstorming on people, and he either mentioned it or we were...
Yeah, I remember there was sort of a passing of the torch discussion, and Pete was like, Mike...
Yeah, he sort of like gave us a few
Yeah.
like options of people, and then we were like, I think let's chat with Mike. And once we had our first like proper band meeting with Mike, we were just like, there's no need to like talk to anyone else.
He can name all Wimbledon winners back to 1950. He's the guy.
Savant.
Yeah.
I believe he reached out to us. I believe, I could be wrong here,
I could be wrong. I believe he reached out to us, and it just felt right. And then we met up, and yeah, we just clicked and hugged, kissed, and that's it, you know.
Yeah, it kind of felt like it was sort of just this thing waiting in the wings to coalesce. Yeah. And since then, it has just felt like a natural fit to the point where it just feels like it's always been this way.
We've proven that we can have an Australian band headline the Metro playing instrumental post-rock, which has never been done before, and we've got a pathway to get there. Now, there are all different ways that you can get there. You could, do big supports and get Triple J support like Sleep Makes Waves, or you can go through this incredible journey that a band like We Lost the Sea has gone through and have the success of an album like Departure Songs.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan. Yeah, I love their music. Yeah, and I cannot wait, and I hope we can tour in the world together. Yeah, I love them so much.
When I joined the band in 2012, we had the band had the quietest place on earth sitting on a hard drive in a drawer. And Mark and I were sort of scrambling to work out what to do with it and how to put it out. And, we had a little bit of experience from playing in bands, but you always think you've got a little bit of experience until you realise you don't, or you meet someone that has got experience, or you get 10 years older and go, fuck, I knew nothing back then.
Bad at getting together, bad at being organised, bad at doing anything. And so we had no idea about anything. And so just having someone who was like, oh, maybe I can help steer the ship or whatever, and that was promising. And you feel like a rock star, right? Like you're like, oh, I've got a label. I'm bigger than Pink Floyd right now.
So I first heard about We Lost the Sea from some friends who'd seen them play around Sydney. And I think I booked them for a show, maybe at the Annandale Hotel. And I just immediately loved their sound. The riffs were awesome. The vocals were a great addition. And, by that stage, I was like fully into instrumental music. But, what Torpy was doing was very powerful and emotional. And I just thought they were an awesome band with a lot of potential. And so I was, really happy when they asked me to get involved with The Quietest Place on Earth. And I love listening to that record.
I remember sitting down in Hyde Park in Sydney with Mark and Mike, and it was our first official meeting with Mike Solo, and he was working in his office job at the time, and he had half an hour spare for us and grabbed his lunch, and we sat down on the grass in Hyde Park and we went over some ideas about this. And I think, Mark and I were like, oh, but we're cool and we've got a name and, what can we do? And Mike was kind of like, it's cool, the record's good, and yeah, you guys have done some shows, and yeah, that's cool, and we'll help you out. But basically, I remember him saying something, I don't know if it was that meeting, it was very close to that he said something like, my involvement with you will increase once your momentum gets going. Basically, he's not going to waste his time on a band that isn't going to inject their own energy and time and effort into something and make it become something, and then he jumps on board and then sort of gives you a push, and that's exactly what's happened. And flash forward 10 years and we were like, oh fuck, we knew nothing back then. But his logic has come clear over the years about how he invests his time in bands.
and he has invested a lot of time into us, and it's really started to pay off. And that's our relationship with Birds Robe and how it's grown. And
March of 2013, Chris took his own life, which was obviously devastating.
It was a tragedy, but out of that tragedy kind of arose this, like, not just a really great band, but a really important, like, outpouring of emotion from the scene that they were kind of beginning to belong to in Birds Robe. Because I think it was pretty early in them playing shows for Birds Robe that their singer, you know, tragically took his own life. And I remember the first show that they played back together as an instrumental band, I believe, was at the Annandale, and there was just so much, like, visceral emotion in that room, but so much support as well. I don't know that I mean, I can't say for sure. I don't know the guys. It's hard to imagine them being able to be a band much longer after something like that happens without having, like, a really solid support network as creative people, to have, like, the capacity to, like, keep making music after something like that happens.
Yes, we bunkered down for like a year, I guess, from then, a bit over a year, and we wrote without, like, concern for what we were doing. That's probably the wrong way to put it. We wrote without a care for how people were going to question us or think of it. Because in my mind, and I don't know if it's the same as you, I was like, well, fuck everyone. No one's going to be like, oh, you guys suck now without a singer or whatever, because they'd be a piece of shit. And like, no one really, we had no expectations. No one was, like, expecting us to do anything really. And I think for us, we're just like, let's just do this record. Let's write this thing. Let's, like, put what's in here and what's happening in here, and let's just get it out and use this as our, like, grieving process. And like, yeah, we recorded it and wrote it, and we, like, really, it was really cathartic for us.
I do remember us walking out of tracking at 301, the old 301, and finishing Departure Songs and going, that's fucking awesome. We feel great. And we just sort of went, well, I guess we're an instrumental band now. I think that's kind of where that decision was officially made, I suppose. But just thinking about the timeline, like, that's a crazy short amount of time between losing Torpy and then coming up with this whole new record. Yeah. And the effect that it's had has been a slow burn, I think.
And I don't even think at the time we knew, like, what we had written at all, in any way, shape or form. We just were like, this is a record, it's cool, hopefully some people like it.
Well, when Departure Songs came out and when we actually started playing it in full, we were like, this is really working for us. I guess we were an instrumental band for now. Yeah.
Departure Songs is a really, really amazing record.
Yeah, Departure Songs just perfectly captured. To me, that's like archetypal post-rock. That album is close to perfect.
Stunning song arrangements, a lot of really deep and nuanced emotion coming through the songs. I think that's a bit of a masterclass in expression, that album. And it comes from a very deep place and obviously a very difficult, traumatic experience. Again, all ideas I really connect with in art and music. Happy to call all those guys friends, and it's just been absolute joy seeing them touring the world and getting the recognition that they're getting.
We also see have, like, transcended the size or scale, like, emotionally, of a post-rock band for many, many people.
Every time I think about it, and there's songs there that I'll cry every time I listen to them. I just can't help it. They're just so beautiful, and I've probably cried more to them than any other band.
They've gone beyond the boundary of what I thought this little, like, Birds Robe community was capable of.
Yeah, it was amazing to see what they built, how far they went, and I guess the musical reinvention was was very inspiring, I guess, to see how you can reinvent what you do and find new ways to explore your music.
Stable rock while we've been sort of being, fuck, what do we do? And the tragedy and the highs and the lows and all that stuff. And he's just sort of been, it's okay. We can do it like this, or we can do it like that, or you don't have to do it at all. Oh, okay. Oh, that's nice. You know, okay, cool. Take a breath, move on. Yeah.
When Robe started expanding and I kind of had the confidence to start working with bands that were a little bit outside of the obvious, one of the first bands that I kind of went to was Trollhorgen. I was playing drums in Toehider and we did a short tour together, and I just thought they were the wackiest, most awesome band that I'd seen in ages.
For me, it was probably when we went to that first Featherfest at the Tone, at Tone.
Is that the one in Melbourne?
No.
That was the first time I heard him, where we actually met Toehider, and Mike was playing drums at the time, and we were just so blown away by Toehider that we were like, sort of like, you know, fanboying hard, and we were like, oh, we want to meet these guys and get to talk to them, and we did.
Step 2, do a bathroom or two, do never run it back.
I was probably sitting there talking to him with my fingers crossed behind my back, being, please give us something, please let us play with these bands, but please. But he actually, he said it to us. I think it was in Wollongong on that tour when we played at now defunct Yours and Ours Cafe.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
we went and got kebabs.
Kind of got to the end of this tour, and I was talking to Amy, who was playing bass in Toe Hider, just saying like, man, like they're going to put out a record, and they don't have anyone like doing, you know, bookings or label and stuff. Do you think I should ask them? Because they're awesome. And she was like, hell yeah, like they're the best. So yeah, I think we went to like a kebab shop or something.
He didn't get a kebab because he was doing a health kick at the time, and I remember him just eating heaps of carrots, just raw carrots in his backpack.
Yeah.
And he came with us and had dinner with us and started gushing over us and telling us how much he sort of liked our music and thought we were doing something cool, and sort of offered to if we wanted to do some more gigs, and we were like, yeah, let's go. And now that we're here.
All of these are grisly apparition can never be contained.
Yeah, so 2015, so we supported Trail of Dead and Mew that year. That was big. That was straight after the European tour with Tango Thoughts of Living, who were from Perth. And yeah, those tours were excellent. We got to play some big rooms like the Triffid, Max Watts. Yeah, really, it felt like we're really in our groove that time. Like, it felt like, not to say that we're full time, but like every weekend something Soulcuria was happening, which was like a big deal for us because it was something that we put forward, and you know, we sacrificed quite a lot to kind of get to the position, and then to make that sacrifice and to see things happening and opportunities become available when you're doing it. It was like, yes, this is good, this is feeling nice, let's keep doing this. So yeah, 2015 was, I still go down as one of the best years of my life. It was just, yeah, so much Soulcuria stuff without much happening in like our personal lives really. So
we tried to really be self-sufficient for as long as possible. And, you know, we got a lot of help from Mike and from other bands in the scene too. Like, you know, it was the kind of place where a lot of bands would work together to try and help each other out in terms of putting gigs on and things like that. But yeah, there was a point where limitations became apparent. And I think, I don't know how other bands in the Birds Robe stable or elsewhere in Australia would feel about it, but like, it did feel like Australia had a bit of an upper ceiling that you could only go so far off your own steam before you really needed someone to believe in you to kind of help you get to that next level. And particularly when you're doing something as left field as what we were doing, and a lot of the other Birds Robe bands would be the same, I feel, you know, that, yeah, it's hard to find people that just get it, who are in the traditional music industry. You know, like you'd try and, you know, cold email, you know, PR people or, you know, music journalists or, you know, even bookers for venues and things like that, and just get zero response back, right? And so that was really the point where we really needed to lean on people like Mike to help us realize what it is that we wanted to do, which is to play these kind of medium-sized and upper shows, like outside of these like tiny, you know, stage in a corner of a pub venues, where you can actually get a decent audience seeing the results of what you've been pouring your heart into the last few years.
Really consistent show. They really they really chased this idea of being the soundtrack, the perfect soundtrack band, going to the extent of producing an entire movie so that they could play it on stage as well.
Right. Yeah, that was cool stuff, wasn't it?
Moody motherfuckers.
So for a moment there, I kind of felt like Bird's Robe was the only one around like doing anything in the, prog post-rock space. But, when I met Ellie and Tibor, who were working with Wild Thing, and Lachlan Dale started the Artist Catharsis label, and Dougal McLaughlin and people like that were kind of reaching out about doing shows together. That's when I realized, there's actually like a lot of people in this space who are really enthusiastic about it. And we all like different kind of elements of the musical spectrum. We overlap a little bit, but it's all kind of genre adjacent. And so I really enjoyed getting to know these guys and working with them on shows, or, talking about their artists or their goals and how, some of the contacts that we had could maybe help them out. And, I really appreciated the kind words and support that they would throw towards Bird's Robe and Bird's Robe bands as well, because, made us look really good because they're doing awesome stuff and talking nicely about us. But, I've really felt like collaboration has been the key to moving forward really in the music industry in any significant way, and just really thankful to have had these relationships with these people for such a long time now, who are all individually doing great stuff.
Years ago, I think it was around 2011, I heard that there was a crew in Sydney putting on really cool gigs of really interesting bands, and my band Alithia, we were from Melbourne, and we were looking for gigs in Sydney. So I reached out. So every time I was looking for really cool bands for us to play with, I would check out who the contact was, and the contact was always Mike Solo at Bird's Robe. And it was getting close to a dozen bands. It's like, who is this guy?
One of the first things I ever did in the Australian music industry was I brought Orphanland out from Israel, and we had Voyager, who were sort of coming into their own in the progressive space, and Awesome Wells on the tour. And I went to Big Sound. It was my first ever Big Sound. It was September 2013. And I think Mike and I were the only, we were one of the only rock and metal people there, but we were definitely the only progressive, post-rock, alternative kind of people there as well. So Mike and I instantly hit it off. And Mike was basically just like, hey, you're doing this Orphanland tour. That's awesome. Let's meet and let's connect. Ever since I met Mike, we've had the most incredible relationship. We were able to really help each other and share information that supports both of us, supports the scene, supports Australian progressive music, and just progressive music and progressive rock and metal and post-rock around the world. It could have been very easy for Mike and I to, kill each other and just say, hey, we're in competition with each other and stuff you. But both Mike and I are not like that, and we decided really early on to take a different path and to really, really work together. And I think it's a credit to our relationship, and also to Mike just being such an amazing human being and one of the best people I've ever met in my career and in my life.
Bird's Robe reached out to me because I was living in Hungary at the time, asking if we could help out with some shows with Meniscus. They also needed a show for Sleep Makes Waves in Budapest, so I got involved. I booked the European tour for Meniscus and also put up Sleep Makes Waves in Budapest, and since then we've just been in contact over the years.
I remember that Mike and I and Tim Charles were talking, and we were like, hey, wouldn't it be great if we got our bands at Big Sound and we got someone to come see our bands from overseas? And I said to Mike, well, who are you thinking about? And Mike was like, we should get Andy Farrow down. I said, well, what does he do? He said, well, he manages Opeth and Devon Townsend and Paradise Lost, and he's got this NMC Live booking agency and publishing company. We didn't know anybody at Big Sound, so we had to track someone down. We found out who the programmer was, and I bumped into the programmer at a show at Workers Club, and I was basically like, hey, we've got this burgeoning progressive rock scene and metal scene and post-rock scene, and we don't have any representation at Big Sound. We don't have anybody coming to see us, and we're ready to go. And he was like, okay, you know what? You're right. Let's bring Andy down. So we got Andy down. There was this VIP Big Sound pre-event that we went to, which Andy was invited, and I was a speaker at Big Sound that year, so I was invited as well. and Mike came along as well in an Orphanland t-shirt to this VIP event, which I thought was absolutely hilarious, and credit to Mike's sense of humor. And Tim Charles was also there at Big Sound, and we did this secret showcase for Relive Scaris in Melbourne for Andy. It was like a secret show at the Evelyn. Anyway, Tim Charles came, and Mike, and myself, we were at Big Sound with Andy. We got Big Sound to help bring Andy down, and we were driving Andy nuts about our bands. I mean, we were so excited to have somebody from overseas there to actually, give a shit about our stuff. So he brought me all this way to Australia, and he's like, "Who are you guys? Are you guys like the pulse? The pulse of the scene? Things are about to happen." And Tim Charles was like, "Yeah, that's exactly right, Andy. We're the pulse." And he's like, "Okay, good to know. I know why I'm here." And in the end, he came to Big Sound, and he signed a bunch of the bands to publishing. He signed like Relive Scaris to his agency, which the next summer they got like 10 summer festivals, and that was sort of the break for them. And it was a really, really amazing experience. And through Mike and I working together on stuff like that, we were able to really take Aussie prog and post rock around the world, and people like Andy were really, really instrumental in terms of giving us a platform in Europe, which was a very hard market for us to break as an industry professional, but also in terms of our band. So thank you, Andy.
Alex Tullett, incredible musician, multi-talented across a whole different types of music. Incredible knowledge of fringe types of music, prog especially. Lovely guy, approachable, funny, great dude.
So this whole period, like 2010 to 2015, was really busy, and we had so many incredible accomplishments for the Birds Robe bands. But during this time was kind of when Alex Tullett started to step away from Birds Robe, and he wanted to do other things. I think he also felt like I'd kind of taken over some of the organization and the management element of the bands, and he was kind of looking for other things to engage himself creatively and professionally. So, I was working my day job, and, instead of playing video games, I'm doing the Birds Robe stuff all the time. And, my head was kind of buried in all this work for such a long time that, it took me a minute to kind of realize that, he wasn't always around as much as he had been.
So I guess I've always been, because my taste is so wide, I find it really hard to not spread myself pretty thin across very different projects with very different levels of energy, involvement. And there was a period of time where I was first learning to DJ, and I was going back to my love of hip hop that I had, which had never gone away. Continued to love hip hop. And so I'd be going to Birds Robe shows, or I'd be playing shows, and I'd have to finish up there, and then I'd be packing up and then going on to a club and doing like an hour and a half, 2 hour long hip hop DJ set. And there were times when I would be at the gig and I would tell other bands what I was going to be doing, or why I had to leave so quickly, and they would laugh at me for that. And I'd get to the gig that I was playing and tell people where I just had been, and they would laugh at me for that as well. And it was a lot of conflict and a lot of cognitive dissonance, because I knew I loved both of those things, but I was finding it harder and harder to do them both properly. And around at the same time, a few things happened where I realized that Mike was just so much better equipped mentally to be able to do what needed to be done to grow the Birds Robe brand, but also to help all of those other bands grow. His memory, his organizational skills, his ability to like reach out to people and know where the new venues were, know who he would need to talk to get that going. Yeah, it was all like, I didn't have any of that stuff. I was pretty good at being able to talk to bands about their craft, and I was always really good at you know, the categorization element of it all and like the macro vision for the project. But there were a couple of gigs that I turned up to, and Mike had already been there, you know, an hour earlier, and he'd already set it up, and I was like, well, I'm not necessary here. I'll just go and I'll sit over here until the gig begins, and then, you know, I'd have a good time and still enjoy being there, still enjoy that energy. But it was pretty clear that I wasn't helping anymore. So I just started focusing on other stuff kind of naturally. There was no malice really. Like there was a bit of sadness that I wasn't needed, as there often is with stuff like this. But I never begrudged Mike that. And there were still times where like he would come to me with a new album that was going to be coming out on the label, or he'd message me about, he'd be like, well, what do you think of this band? Or he'd say like, hey, you remember how you showed me 65 Days of Static 5 years ago? Well, guess what? We're releasing their catalog. And I'd still feel like, okay, I'm still, you know, he still is reaching out to me. My name was still on the website for a really long time. I always felt still like connected to Birds Robe, even if I wasn't directly involved. But then when I got the radio and I had the radio show, I had a reason to be going to the gigs again and a reason to be participating in the scene. And at that time I was DJing, but I didn't feel as much cognitive dissonance or shame about doing both things. So I always like being involved when I can.
But you know, I still always went to him for advice when we'd have, you know, bands come to us about joining Birds Robe shows. I'd ask him for advice. I'd always try and share exciting news with him. You know, he was the reason that I listened to so many of these bands. And when we had the opportunity to tour 65 Days of Static, or when we brought Mew to Australia for the first time in 2015, you know, those were acts that I listened to because of Alex, and I really wanted to share those moments with him. So yeah, I mean, I'm forever grateful to him, and I still miss, you know, that kind of dynamic that we had, where it was like just the two of us going out there and meeting bands and you know, shaping the vision for Birds Robe together. But you know, there's always going to be space here whenever he wants to come in and do stuff. And you know, we still chat about music and, you know, still see each other at shows, and yeah, you know, love him heaps, and yeah, always just, you know, super value any input or contributions that he makes to Birds Robe world.
That appreciation never really went away whenever we were there. So it was just like, oh, well, okay, how can I help? And then I feel like that even as my involvement with Birds Robe began to fall away, because it did. Even in like my future projects, I was kind of looking for ways to still help the scene. I had a show on FBI radio for about 2 years on Sunday nights called Close to the Edge, where it was basically an excuse for me to play that stuff to people. It was literally the last show of the week. It was Sunday night from 11 p.m. till 1 a.m. Most of the people at the studio didn't know the show existed. But I still got to say like, hey, I'm giving the radio debut to the new Closure in Moscow song, or like, you know, hey, this is an old Squat Club track that has never had any radio play. Like, it came out 3 years ago, but I don't care. I'm playing it tonight. Like, I always wanted to have some like involvement still.
I learned so much from Alex. You know, I learned how to talk to bands. You know, and I used to really need him to do that for me. And once Birds Robe kind of started to make a bit of a name for itself, that task got a little bit easier for me, because people would kind of see me as like, oh, it's Mike from Birds Robe, as opposed to who the hell is this dorky guy? So that made my job a lot easier, to be honest. And yeah, I felt like, you know, even without Alex, I was a big enough boy that I can have some of those conversations myself. But, you know, even to this day, like, I still sometimes rely on introductions from bands, you know, or bands, you know, being a reference for what it's like to work with Birds Robe when a new artist kind of comes into the family. So, you know, that kind of spirit of community and family and collaboration is very much alive still. And yeah, you know, I often still think of Alex and how he would talk to bands, and sometimes copy some of the things that he would do. Name drop a few potential influences that maybe the band had been listening to. And you know, hopefully it works. I don't know, someone will have to give me feedback on that. It's kind of been like a few years now of Bird's Robe kind of gradually escalating, and you know, it felt like the right time to celebrate all that with a little 5th birthday celebration at the end of 2015 with, you know, a dozen bands playing, one glorious day of post-rock and prog. I guess that's where the Mic Fest thing started to come up.